Hello everyone, Lauren Elizabeth here with Lauren Elizabeth Animal Art, and I help beginner through professional level artists reduce stress while mastering animal art. So to celebrate Mother's Day, which is right around the corner, and also very fitting because we're about to have our second child, baby Zachary, is right on the way, so I decided on this Mother Goose painting tutorial. We'll be painting this in acrylics, and yes, this is actually very doable for beginners, intermediate level artists, and the advanced. Now the traceable sketch outline that you transfer onto your paper or canvas, I have linked down below for you, that you would have transferred before we get started painting. So guys, without further ado, let's get started. All right, so with a medium or large flat brush, I'm going to mix up lots of white with a little bit of phthalo blue to create a medium blue that we're going to use to paint the sky in between each of the trees. Now don't worry so much about this sky being perfectly blended, okay? We're just going to lay down a base of a medium to light blue, and then we're going to do touch-ups and also another coat over the sky at the very end. So take a few deep breaths, get comfy, and enjoy yourself. I also want to take this time just to thank all you mothers after being pregnant for the second time and almost having 2 children by this point. I have high respects for moms. Being a mother is stinking hard work, whether you have a fur baby or a human child. So please enjoy yourself, give yourself some grace, and also pass this on to another mama that you know. We're next going to work on the trees. We're going to work background to foreground. And the color I'm going to use to paint the trees is phthalo blue. So I want to make sure I've washed my brush out so it's not got any white left on it. I'm going to use phthalo blue with raw sienna. So I want more phthalo blue than raw sienna here because you want to keep it dark. But we still want to pull in some browns for that brownish tint for the trees. And so that's phthalo blue with raw sienna, and I'm going to use my flat brush to paint in the large and small trees, but you might need to switch to a small liner brush or detail brush for those skinnier ones.
I watch you as you drive. Do you know I'm looking? And I can't help but smile. Do you know how much I love you? You put my favorite song on. I put my feet up, and we just sing along. And I can't help but feeling, just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here together? If I could stop the time, don't you know that I would? 'Cause I'm just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? Forever. 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 I watch you as you sleep. You don't know I'm looking. With you everything's complete. Do you know how much I love you? I put your favorite song on just to wake you up. When I dance around, I can't help but feeling, I'm just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here together? If I could stop the time, don't you know that I would? 'Cause I'm just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? Forever. 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 I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here together? If I could stop the time, don't you know that I would? 'Cause I'm just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? Forever. 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 I watch you as you drive. Do you know I'm looking?
Now, I will admit, I really don't like painting the sides because I just want to go and paint the surface of the canvas and not have to worry about them. But it sure does save time. So don't forget about the sides. Make sure that as you're mixing up paint, you make enough of it so that you can paint all 4 sides. Next, we're going to work on all those big and little branches. I'm switching to a round detail brush. We're going to make different width branches, so some are going to be thicker than others, and then some are going to be really skinny. And at this point, I'm not really following the reference photo so much. I'm just having random branches come off of different trees, and I want to have them spanning out so that they're kind of going off the canvas. So don't worry so much about these branches being perfectly straight because you see branches all the time that kind of have bumps and grooves and stuff like that in them. So just take your time and do as many as you want. And I'm also using the same color. So that's phthalo blue with raw sienna. The same color we use for the trees, I'm using for these branches. Now, if you'd like to learn more about drawing and painting animals like your household pets and wildlife, I've created the online Animal Art Masterclass for artists of all levels. This is an ongoing acrylic painting class that focuses on 2 main things: reducing stress with animal art therapy and mastering your skills in acrylic painting and animal art. This is something that helped me recover from my battle with addiction, anxiety, and depression, which is why I've created this class for artists 15 and up. So if you'd be interested, check out the link I have down below called the Online Animal Art Masterclass. But guys, let's get back to painting. Ever so carefully, I'm just going to focus on one branch at a time, making them range in lengths and widths, having them go in all sorts of directions. Feel free to have kind of broken branches or stubs on here, or like I did, most of my branches are connected from one tree and out. Sometimes they're touching 2 trees, but I have a lot of different branches going in all different directions. Next, we're going to work on the leaves. Now, it's actually okay if your branches are still a little wet. It's even better if they're tacky, but we're going to have to do a lot of layers over these leaves, so it's okay if you see a little bit of the black coming through from the bottom. I'm using the colors grass green with a little bit of cadmium yellow. That's grass green with cadmium yellow. You can also use phthalo blue with cadmium yellow if you don't have grass green. And with a small flat brush or even a round detail brush, you can use that. I'm just laying down these triangular shaped and circular shaped leaves. They're far away, so you can't make out shape a whole lot, so it's okay if you do bunches of dabs. I'm clustering them on different branches, the small ones and the thicker ones. Now I guarantee you're going to see some of those dark branches shine through behind the leaves. Don't get too caught up on that. We're just going to lay down the base, let that dry, work on the next steps, and then go back to layering more green over top to kind of make them more vibrant and also pull out the highlights in those leaves. Green is just one of those colors because it has yellow in it that it requires a lot of coats to get that thick, rich color. I'm using Master's Touch Basics brand. I really like them. Even in the thick body, it still does that compared to the medium body paint. But that is just something that we have to go through whenever we're painting leaves. I've noticed with acrylics, it just does that. One thing that I recommend for this part is not to evenly space out the leaves. You want to have clusters where you have some branches with lots of leaves, other branches with just a few. You also want to vary the size and the shape of the leaf so that some leaves look further away, some leaves look closer, and then just they're more natural looking when it's more spontaneous like this. All right, so now that we have most of our, if not all of our leaves down, we can always add some at the end, but I am making a little bit lighter tone with some grass green, cadmium yellow, and white. Just a little bit of white, not too much, because we're going to go even lighter with this later. And so I just want to start adding a few of those medium and light values to the leaves, especially the top ones. They're getting a little bit of light, and then you have some random little bits of light that are hitting leaves around the bottom. So even if your leaves are still wet, that's actually a good thing, just because we want to gradually progress from dark to light. All right, I'm so excited, guys. We're going to get started on Mama Goose. I'm using a small round detail brush and just black, and we're going to work on the head and the neck, the darkest parts, and then we're going to slowly move down towards the body. So I just want to very carefully work my way around those white and highlighted areas on the face. So I'm not applying black to everywhere where I see just that dark black on the goose. I really want to leave some spots open for some of my lighter values that I'm going to be applying. Now, when starting a painting, we always want to pinpoint the light source. So in this case, there is direct light hitting the top of the goose and front. That forested area is getting not a whole lot of light. So for this painting, the right side of almost everything we paint is going to have our darkest values. And then the far left side is going to have our lightest. Now in the upcoming steps, there's a lot of areas that I'm going to work wet into wet. So we want this black to still be a little wet, not tacky, so that we can pull in some lighter grays and blend that in while it's still wet. All right, so now I'm going to mix up a dark gray. We're using black here, so I'm just going to add some white to black. And I want to create a dark gray to start building up from dark to light. Blending is only possible while the paint is still wet. And for acrylics, we know that it doesn't take long for it to dry. So I'm just going to fill in the rest of the white at the front of the neck with this dark gray. Now for this small little area, I'm using a liner brush. I'm going to pull in even more white into this dark gray because that highlight on the top of the head is getting quite a bit of light. All right, so we're going to get real tiny here, working on the beak, which is why I switched to a small round detail brush. This is a liner brush. You can even use a rigger brush for this. And I like to add blue to my noses and beaks. So I'm mixing up black with a little bit of phthalo blue and just the tiniest bit of white. And I'm going around the bottom part of the beak that's getting very little light. Now take your time here. There's no rush. You can always pause and start this video at any time because with those trees being in the background and the branches, using such a dark color, we're kind of losing the proportions of the beak just slightly. Because we have the blue and a little bit of white there, it kind of helps us know what is what, but just be careful as we add the next layers. It should kind of bring that out more. I just made phthalo blue with a little bit of black and white, and that's a very little bit amount of black because it's creating this light blue hitting the front of the beak. As I'm doing that, I'm carefully going around the nostril. That nostril is kind of like a dark line, and we just want to paint around that so that we can go in right after this color with black and fill that in. All right, my next step is going in with just black with a clean, damp brush. I always say that you want to wash your brush regularly so you don't have paint drying to it, and you also don't want to have too much water on it, so you want to dab it off on a cloth or a table like I am. Well, I guess it's a table with a cloth over top. Now what I just did is I washed up my brush of the black, I dried it off, and I picked up some more of that dark gray that we applied to the head. Now this gray I'm going to use to just apply that little bit of highlight on the cheek as well as the entire eye. Then after that, while that's still wet, I'm going with just black, and I'm going to fill in the bottom part of the eye so that it leaves a little tiny highlight on the top rim of the eye where it's just getting a little bit of a highlight. Now it's time to add just a little bit more white to the blue mixture we were just applying to the beak. And we want to define, really pull out those bright, light highlights at the very front of the beak and along the side. I'm even going to add a little bit to around the nostril. All right, so now I'm just going to do some touch-ups around that face. I want to make sure that all my proportions are right. Sometimes we can lose that in our layers that we apply, and so I'm just going to do some touch-ups with my light blues, dark blues, and blacks. Next, we're going to work on that characteristic white goose marking right around the jaw. And I'm going to create a light gray for this. And because we're working in such a small area, I will be again applying the wet into wet technique, where I apply this medium value of light gray. And it's actually not the lightest value, because then we go on with a little bit lighter gray for underneath the jaw. And then we darken it up with just a tiny bit of black for the top part right behind the eye. I'll show you right now. So right now I'm pulling in straight white to paint the bottom part of the jaw. And then I'm going to wash out my brush and pull in a little tiny bit of black to create a just tiny bit darker gray. And I'm going to blend that in while it's still wet to the top there. Next, we're going to work on that shadow that the neck is creating on the duck's back. So I'm going to actually use black and raw sienna for this with a detail brush. Now be careful how much black you add, because we don't want this too dark. We want this to look a little bit more brown and a little bit lighter in value compared to the black neck. Okay, so once you mix it up, we're going to apply that just to that little strip for the shadow. And we're not going to stop there, actually. We're going to go around the bird and find tiny little areas that we see this color as well. That's creating those really dark values. Just make sure you mix up enough this color so we can do that. And also you might need to switch to a smaller, thinner brush, because we're going to be outlining some of the back feathers with this color. All right, so here we go, looking for those shaded areas. They're kind of creases and bumps and grooves in the feathers of the body. Now you'll notice this is a lot darker than what we're seeing in the reference photo because this is going to be our base. We're going to slowly layer from darkest values to our lightest values. And this also creates really strong contrast so we can really make this bird pop. Now very carefully I'm going to outline these back feathers. We have a distinct sketch for this one right here I'm working on, but the one up top we're going to actually be creating those lines ourselves. They're really thinly placed, so you might need to use a thinner brush, one that you're more comfortable with to create these tiny thin lines. All right, so you're probably going to be relieved that we are not going to go and outline every single feather. What we're going to do is we're going to use a medium flat brush and cover the base layer for the rest of the body. A lot easier to do it this way. Plus, this is how I actually paint birds from a distance because we can't make out as much detail as if it were close up. So I just mixed in a little bit of black with lots of raw sienna to create this color that's a little bit more brown than the other colors we've used for the bird's body. And I'm applying this for the base layer of the darkest area of the wing. See how we're getting a shadow on the bottom of the wing and it kind of goes up? So with my flat brush, I'm just going to fill it in. Now you see where that shadow is being created from the neck? I'm leaving the area behind that part and in front of it, behind that shadow and in front of the shadow. I'm leaving that white because we're going to go lighter in value there. It's just the back of the duck and to the bottom that we're going to use this color. Now another important note is that this color that you're applying right now should be lighter than the color we used for that shadow being created from the neck or by the neck. Because when we're applying this next to it, it should be lighter in value. It shouldn't be as dark because we use the same colors, and I just want to make sure you're using the right amount of raw sienna with your black. Now here on the duck is where I do add more black, so it does become darker like that shadow. It's getting the least amount of light, so while that's still wet, I'm blending in a darker mixture of black and raw sienna. Okay, so now we're getting a little bit lighter. We're going to use the same colors, except we're going to add some white this time. You can remix it entirely different mixture like I'm doing right now, but we use white, a little bit of black, and raw sienna. So that's white, just a tiny bit of black, and raw sienna. And now we can fill in the rest of the white on the goose's body, aside from those back feathers and from that little duck in between the feathers. We're going to fill them in with this color. Now for this part, I would say watch me before giving it a go yourself. I am turning my brush at an angle to use that flat edge, and I'm just creating these two layers. So coming out from the layer we just started painting, and those are going to be the lines, just the sections of feathers that go from short to long. Now for this little back feather that I'm about to paint, I wasn't sure about color. I knew it needed to be a little bit darker, but I went and made it too dark. So all I recommend for you to do is just add a little bit of black to your paint mixture that we were just using, just to darken it up a little bit, make it a little bit more gray. And then go back to that original color we were applying for the main color for the body, or just add white and fill in the next part. This is getting a lot more light. It's kind of sticking up a little bit, so we want to make that real light. Now we're going to work on those back feathers, but we're going to leave that outline that we applied. I'm going to mix up violet with a tiny bit of black, raw sienna, and white. I had a little bit of trouble making that light enough, so that's why I ended up adding in some white. So again, that's violet, white, a little bit of black, and raw sienna. Now for this little sliver of a feather that we see, I'm going to add in a little bit more white. And then I'm going to add a little bit more white for the feathers above it. It's actually a little bit lighter in value than the ones that we're working on now. I also decided to make the lowest feather a little bit darker by adding a little bit more violet. Now I really wanted to pull in some more purples throughout the goose, so there's just a few of those darker shaded areas that I added this to. For this next part, I really recommend you watch me and the color I choose, and also how I create these feather outlines. I'll just be outlining each individual feather with a tiny bit of raw sienna and lots of white. There's some areas on the body and the wing that are so highlighted that I'll just clump together and just block in this color. Now there's other areas that are getting a little bit less light, and I'm really going to define each feather. Now this pattern that I'm about to create is very tiny and thin and delicate, so you want to have a very thin brush like a rigger brush or a liner brush. Now this may sound a little funny, but what helps me think of how to make this pattern is dragon scales. I'm kind of clustering these half circles together almost as if I'm making scales of a fish. But as they go out to the end of the goose, these feathers are gonna get longer and a little bit thinner. Now this size of half circle that I'm clustering together, I'll pull out to that first line, and then we're gonna get a little bit longer with their feathers as we move out towards the back of the bird. All right, so we're going to do the next layer of feathers, and two things are going to change here. The size of the feather, as well as the color that I'll be using to create that outline. I'm going to add a little bit more raw sienna to this mixture. We're just going to get a little bit darker in color, but I'm going to keep the width of the line, just like I did the first set, the same. All these widths of these lines, these little half circles, are going to be the same. All right, now for the next layer. Again, we're going to get just a little bit darker. I'm adding a little bit of black and raw sienna, and these are going to get longer and a little bit thinner. It's very important that as we work up that you space them out evenly and pay close attention to the rounded ends of the feathers. All right, and now for the last row of feathers. These are going to be much, much longer. They're going to span out all the way to the end. Once again, I'm keeping the line the same width. I'm spacing them out evenly, and I'm rounding the ends of the feathers. Now I left out a few feathers and all different lengths on the side here, and I'm just very loosely applying kind of like little open C's, backward C's, just to kind of get that little bit of feather that we see on the side there. Now I'm picking up more of that color and I'm going to do it little tiny ones very loosely again on this dark shaded area here. And then even more carefully, I'm going to cut in to the shadow that's being created on the back. If you look very closely at this area, the feathers are clustered really closely, so they almost just look like lines. So you want to make these tighter and almost more linear than circular. Now we're not done yet with this color. I'm going to add just a few little dabs and lines to those back feathers. My next step is to recreate the same light brown that we did at the very beginning. So the ones where we first started the little feathers, the individual outlines of them. So white with raw sienna is the color used for that. And now I'm just creating them on the back, on the other side, and behind where we see that shadow being created by the neck. Now at this point, if you're running out of this color, mix up some more because we're going to add a lot more highlights with this color, a lot more feather outlines to the back of the bird and also the chest area and right in front here, in front of that shadow. Now, compared to the whole rest of the bird, this area is the lightest part. It's just getting a lot of light. So I'm going to add more white to it and just kind of very loosely in a horizontal motion create these little lines. All right, so we still have another layer of highlights to apply over these feathers. So I'm going to add even more white into that mixture we were just using. So this almost looks white, but it's still a very light brown. So I'm just going to go over the feathers and the outlines that are getting the most light exposure. So watch carefully. And I'm also going to use it on the top feathers here just to create more of those highlights. We're getting just some really distinct highlights on those top long feathers. I really want to pull out the highlights in the chest area and right below the jaw on that white marking. So just with some loose dabs facing the light source, I'm going to apply this color to those areas. What will make this look even more vibrant and realistic is going back to those dark values, but I'll be mixing in some more violet. So I'm going to use black, just a tiny bit, with raw sienna, violet, and a little bit of white. Now if you watch carefully, I'm going to apply just a line of this shadow right below where we created the line for the outline of the feather for the longest feathers first. I'll be just focusing on that. And then I'll just touch up a few areas on those shorter feathers. I'm also going to apply this color with a little bit of black to the very front, or I guess bottom, of that shadow. All right, we are done with Mama Goose. We're going to work on those little ducklings. So with a detail brush and black, I'm just going to create the shadow that little head and inside the wings, that bird will work on first. I'm just going to create that little shadow that goes on top of Mama's wings and wraps around the head, as well as that tiny little eye. We only see the side of it. With my round detail brush, I'm going to mix orange with a little bit of cadmium yellow and raw sienna, and that'll be the first low light that we apply to the right side of this little duckling, just being careful going around that eye. I'm going to wash on my brush and mix up cadmium yellow with white. We're going to make a really strong highlight on the left-hand side of that little duckling's head now. Now while that orange, the low light we applied, is still wet, I'm just going to take the tiniest little dab of black, very small amount, and mix it in to create that shadow on the lower right hand side of the duckling. And then I'm going to wash up my brush and mix up a dark blue using phthalo blue and just a tiny bit of white. And I'm going to use that dark blue to fill in the beak of the duck that we only see just the side of it. And we're also going to use that blue to start the duckling underneath Mama Goose. I'll use this blue for that duck's beak as well. Next, very carefully, I'm going to use black and I'm just going to fill in that duckling's eye. The next colors I'm going to mix are raw sienna and black. We'll just block in all the darkest values of this little duckling. Now this is kind of a muddy looking color that we'll make, but I'm going to mix that same color we were just using, the raw sienna black, and I'm going to pull in some cadmium yellow into it. So this is going to be just underneath the duckling's neck, left side of the body, and then we'll get a little bit lighter. For the rest of the white on this duckling, I'm going to use cadmium yellow with orange, and I'm just going to fill in the rest of the white. And what I actually want to do is not so much on the head, but in the back of the body, I want to pull in some of those wet dark browns that we applied already. I kind of want them to mix in and blend with those colors. Now, if you're already working with a rigger brush or liner brush, no worries. But if not, I really recommend for this part to use a very thin brush like that. I'm using black, and on the left side of that beak, I'm going to make it much darker, just keeping the right side of the beak blue. With a little bit of raw sienna and black, I'm just going to create the shadow that's right beneath the neck. It's kind of subtle, so we don't need to make it too dark. And then because we have such a strong highlight on this little duckling's tail, I'm going to add in some more cadmium yellow and white into this orange and yellow mixture and apply that just to the back end of this little guy. Now, I made a little mistake at this part that threw me off for a while, but I figured it out. So all you need to do, and don't do what I do, is fill in the whole head, but just along the right hand side, use just the tiniest little bit of yellow. Keep the lower part above the forehead and to the left of that beak darker with the original color of orange and raw sienna that we made. Now, the other important thing for this area is you see how the feathers are actually kind of almost over top the eye, but not quite. You want to bring that down. If it's actually above too high, it looks a little odd. So just with raw sienna and black, just bring that down just where it touches the eye. With a clean, damp brush, so no other colors on it, just a tiny bit of white, I'm going to add some white to the back tail of this little guy as well as the other one up top. Wonderful! We have finished our birds in this painting. We are going to move on to the rest of the white in the foreground. I'm going to mix up the colors phthalo blue, grass green, and a little bit of black, just a tiny bit as usual. And with a medium flat brush, I'm just going to fill in that shadow right below this duckling, and it's also going to come along the bottom of Mama Goose. So I'm turning my brush at an angle so that I can use that flat edge horizontally, and I'm going to fill in this whole shadow as well as just below Mama's chest and that front wing. Now make sure you wash your brush for this next step. I'm going to show you a little secret of mine that I like to use in my pet portraits and wildlife paintings that help me break up real grassy areas. I'm creating dirt color with raw sienna, a little bit of black and white, and I'm just going to find some areas in this painting just in the front of Mama Goose and behind her where I can just block in some dirt. I'm not covering up all the white, as you can see, just some areas. And then around it, I'm just going to pull in some green grass. All right, so as you can see, I didn't cover up all the white. That's where we're going to add our grass now. So I want this green to be much lighter than the green we used for the leaves in the background because it's getting so much more light. I'm going to wash up my brush and use grass green with white. This is going to be our base first, and then we'll go over with highlights, so you don't need too much white. But what I'm going to do is not only fill in the white around the brown and around the goose and the background leaves and trees, but also create those little clusters of lines, kind of like I do fur, and they're going to be the blades of grass. So to create those blades, I am positioning my brush vertically now. And I'm actually going to twist it back and forth vertically and horizontally to both cut into the brown, creating those blades of grass, but also getting in around any of the leftover white that we have in the background. And it's okay to actually layer those blades of grass over top Mama Goose and the ducklings and the shadows that we've created. I'm not spending too much time trying to perfect each blade of grass. Even though this is in the foreground, I'm just trying to make this a little bit more of a loose painting. Plus, I want the viewer's attention to be on the goose and the ducklings, not so much on the ground. So don't cause yourself too much stress on this part of the painting. Just be free, have fun, and don't be too critical of yourself. Now to capture some highlights on that dirt we made, I'm making a lighter brown with raw sienna and my white. And very loosely, horizontal brush strokes, I'm going to apply very loosely over top the dirt. While we let the dirt and the grass dry for a bit, I'm going to add some more details and contrast to our forest. With a clean damp brush and just black, on the right sides of these trees, both big and small, I'm going to apply a line of black. I'm also going to kind of pull in these lines a little bit so they create a little bit of texture on these trees. And then the tree that is kind of crisscross, the one that's right behind the goose's head, I'm actually going to make that branch behind the front branch darker using just black. Using a small flat brush, and I mean small because we have these short little blades of grass that we're going to do, I'm going to create a lighter color of grass. So this is going to be white with grass green, but it's going to be lighter in value than our base of green that we applied. Here's another little artist tip that might sound like common sense, but a lot of artists aren't taking advantage of this. If you have, say, long blades of grass or long fur to paint or long lines, use a large, thin-edged flat brush. If you have short little hairs, just use a smaller flat brush. The length of your flat brush will really help you in how your lines will look, how straight they become, and just kind of the length you're going for. Next, I'm going to add in just some random rocks in the grass and dirt. I'm going to use raw sienna and black and just create small little loose circles for rocks in and around the foreground. Now we're almost done this painting, guys. We actually only just have a few more steps left. And if you recall at the beginning, we were going to go back to our leaves just to add more color and more highlights to them. And so I mixed up some of my grass green and white, the same colors we used for the highlights on the grass. And I'm just going to add just those random little dabs of this highlight to certain leaves, especially at the top leaves, and then some random ones around the trees and around the bottom. This is also the time to touch up any of the leaves that are showing some of the branches from behind them. So where the leaves are, you can kind of see lines of the branches. We'll mix up some more of your grass green and cadmium yellow just to richen up those leaves. This is also the time that we're going to touch up and add more color to those trees. I'm not necessarily making them lighter. I'm actually just using raw sienna and phthalo blue just to go on all the left sides of the trees. I also want to return back to my sky using my phthalo blue and white, giving it a tint more white this time, just to really bring out the vibrancy of that blue. And I'm just going to very loosely go around a lot of those branches and leaves and Mama Goose. Now, as we wrap up this Mama Goose tutorial, I just want to say thank you so much, Wendy Craig, for letting us use this adorable reference photo. She's actually a part of my public Facebook group called YouTube Community Group, where you can post any of the paintings that you make on my channel, and we can vote on the once a month real-time animal painting tutorial that I post here on my YouTube channel. And we also share reference photos. So if you ever want to check that out, we have so many awesome creatives there posting and sharing reference photos. The one that I just posted recently had so many, and I had such a hard time choosing. So maybe we can even go back and paint some later. I don't know. But I just want to thank all of you, and that is linked down below in case any of you want to join. I would just love to see your rendition of Mama Goose on that group. And if you have any questions at all for me on this tutorial, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. But guys, have a blessed day, and again, happy Mother's Day, mothers. I'll see you all again next week. Bye!